Hi. Okay, so, man, how do I do this? Hold on, let me just adjust this a little bit. Okay, though it's not a perfect adjustment. So today I just want to talk on the topic you see there, and this has been prompted by an inspirational message. I got a message from a particular wife, a young wife. She sent a message, and I'll just summarize. She indicated how much she appreciates what I do, blah, 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 blah. But she had a deep concern, and her concern was that, look, we're married, I love the Lord, and blah, blah, blah. I think my husband loves the Lord too, but I've walked in on him twice masturbating and, watching pornography. And obviously, she was deeply offended and hurt by it and started feeling that she's inadequate. And when she spoke about it to the husband, he didn't really seem to have an issue with it. He just, it didn't really bother him from what she said. And now she feels very bad. She feels he's adulterous. She feels she should end the marriage and that the whole thing doesn't make sense. And you know what I mean. So when she sent me that message, I had to sit and kind of contemplate a bit and then did a voice note back to her and explain that. And because of her message, I said, wow, man, I think let me do another video on this just to help people understand the dynamics of what's going on with this generation today. I know I've had a video like this before where I have explained, but I'm not sure if it was at a conference or a workshop or I did it privately to people. I'm not too sure when I addressed this subject, but I know that I did a comprehensive address on the issue of masturbation and pornography and why they're so bad today. So I'm going to give you guys a bit of a background to this, and it comes from my field. I'm a neurotherapist, neuropsychology therapist, and I do a lot of therapy with a lot of people. And you see, neuropsychology therapy is quite different from counseling. I know a lot of people go for counseling, and counseling is a big thing, but I've said several times that counseling deals directly with symptoms. So you have a particular behavior, people are not happy with that behavior, and then you undergo counseling, which deals with the behavior directly. The problem is that behavior is not a characteristic trait. Behavior is something that comes as a result of something deeper. In other words, people behave in a particular way because they're manifesting a deeper issue. So in other words, when there is a particular issue bothering them, then what would happen is that they will behave in a particular way. So whenever you see any form of behavior, it doesn't matter what the behavior is, but as long as you see behavior in a relationship, behavior in yourself as an individual, it is usually as the result of something that's going on that is bothering you. So I hope that makes sense. So what am I saying? I am saying when you have a young couple like the example I gave, and you have a situation where either the husband or wife is indulging in masturbation in an active manner. Remember, in a marriage, sex is supposed to be quenched. The drive for sex is quenched through sex. You have sex with your spouse. So if you're not having sex with your spouse, then that's an awkward behavior. So what is the cause? That's my point. The behavior is not a characteristic trait. The behavior is as a result of an in or deeper issue. And that issue is then manifesting in this undesired behavior. This is true even if somebody went and started having extramarital affairs outside of marriage, or if they, started doing whatever it is they're doing. As long as they're doing something that's outside the confines of marriage, that's a problem. Now, of course, masturbation and pornography are being done inside the marriage, so that's even more awkward, because then the question is that adultery? So that's what the wife was very concerned about. In fact, she didn't even think whether it was or wasn't. She just felt it wasn't, felt cheated and felt hurt. So let's begin by addressing, is it adultery? By Jesus' standards, absolutely, yes it is. Because the Bible tells us that if you so much as look lustfully at a woman, you have already committed adultery with her in your heart. So as far as the standard of Jesus is concerned, that's adultery. So obviously that then means anyone indulging in pornography, male or female, in the confines of marriage is an adulterer. Anybody indulging in pornography outside of marriage is a fornicator in a way. Now, that's highly debatable and people may argue, but the moral standard Jesus gives is if you look lustfully at a woman and you look lustfully at a woman, that means you admire sexually, you have committed adultery with her in your heart. So now that we've set that standard, which is God's standard, let's now move slightly to a world standard. Now, in the world standard, is pornography and masturbation adultery? My answer is sort of. And that's where it gets a bit funny. Like, what do you mean, Rev, by sort of? I mean, either it is or it isn't. Precisely, that's the problem. It sort of is. So what does that mean? That means you are emotionally invested sexually with images on a screen and then helping yourself or having sex with yourself instead of having sex with your partner. That's adultery, because it means you are expending your sexual energy in something else other than your spouse. So that's sort of adultery. But now, the big question then is, what do we do? What does somebody do? How do you deal with this? Now, in order to understand how to deal with it, we have to look at where it comes from. Where does this come from? And why is it such a big deal? Why is it so dangerous? That's the topic I've put there, and I should be done soon, hopefully. Here's why it's dangerous. You've got to understand that in the past, the time before these dreaded phones and their capacity to bring the internet and pornography to your fingertips, which is so deadly. Before that time, let me tell you, when a young man was developing sexually, the first experience they had with sex was a flesh and blood human being, like a flesh and blood human being, whether in the confines of marriage or otherwise, it was a human being. And what that did is several things. You have to understand that first and foremost, your prefrontal cortex does not fully develop until you're between the ages of 18 and 25. So young adults technically aren't mentally prepared to handle maturity yet, because their prefrontal cortex is still developing. That's why young people are impulsive. That's why young people do stuff that's quite strange, which you know very well that somebody my age wouldn't do, because our prefrontal cortex is fully developed. We have the maturity to understand the depth of a given situation, something young people don't. Now, because their prefrontal cortex isn't well developed yet, you must realize that even their sexual wiring isn't yet fully developed. Now, that's your scary part. So therefore, bonding with a flesh and blood human being is so cardinal, because that becomes their first imprint. Now think about that word. That becomes their first imprint. That's the first time those neural pathways are etched and connected in relation to sexuality. Now, when we have sex, our bodies releases mainly two, but there are three different types of hormones. You've got dopamine, you've got endorphins, you've got oxytocin. So here's how they work. Dopamine is the high. When you have an orgasm, you get that high. That's what dopamine does. In fact, the word dope is actually taken off dopamine. So when we take any drug or any item that causes a high sense of pleasure, that's a dope rush. So that dopamine rush, that high you get, that's coming from the hormone dopamine. So that's the first hormone that's released when you have sex and you orgasm. That high you feel is a rush of dopamine. It lasts usually about 5 minutes. Then the second hormone that's released is endorphins. Now, endorphins are your feel-good hormones, where you just feel nice and peaceable. Endorphins come when you come from exercising. Endorphins come when you come from accomplishing a task. Anytime you do something that gives you a great sense of satisfaction, your body is given a dose of endorphins. So they last a bit longer. They could last 30 minutes, 20 minutes, but they very much connected and combined with dopamine. But dopamine is feel good, whereas dopamine is the high, whereas endorphins are the feel good. Now, both of these occur when you've come from having sex. So when you have sex with a real flesh and blood human being you actually love or have a crush on or whatever it is, ideally a husband or wife, what would happen is that there is that dope. First of all, there's the feel good because you're around them. Remember the butterflies, all that, that's endorphin. So when you're having those feel good feelings, they enhance the experience. And then when you have the orgasm, that's now a dope rush. The two create a very powerful bonding effect, because then now you get oxytocin released, and oxytocin is your bonding hormone. When else is oxytocin released? When a woman is breastfeeding. So every time she's feeding that baby, there's a connection. Endorphins are released and they cause a very powerful bond. The other time, oxytocin is released when a woman is given birth. That's why it is the forget hormone. It helps a woman forget because she's flooded. It's the highest release of oxytocin in the body when they have a natural birth. And what happens is instantly they develop a super bond for the baby. It is also released when a person orgasms and has endorphins. Oxytocin is also released, so there's a bonding. So it is here where people like myself say the concept of soul ties comes from oxytocin, because it's oxytocin that bonds you to another human being. So when you have sex, because of the level of energy, spiritual energy released during sex, there is a bond that is created by oxytocin, and it bonds you to the thing that made you have that experience. Made you have the high, which is the dopamine, and the feel good, which is the endorphin. So the bonding happens powerfully because you've released. So even for the woman, when she orgasms, she also releases oxytocin. When the man orgasms, he releases oxytocin. So there's a bonding. Now, this is supposed to happen naturally with a human being, a flesh and blood human being. Instead, what happens? It happens unnaturally with images. So let's now go there. So imagine first experience for the guy, first experience for the woman. She's watching these images on the internet, and then she starts to masturbate, so he starts to masturbate, and that builds up until they release. Now, when they release, oxytocin is released, but guess what? You're bonding with videos. You're bonding with images on the internet. You're not bonding with a human being. You're not bonding with flesh and blood. I'm here to tell you that what's supposed to happen, the real connection is supposed to be the breathing, the heat, the pleasure, the pressure of the moment, the embraces. That's building the oxytocin and the bonding. And remember, sex is a covenant. So there is a release of water, little seminal fluid by the man, release of wetness or seminal fluid by the woman, and this is the beginning of the bond. That's the water. And then there is the blood, the release of semen by the man, and if it's a virgin for the woman, she also breaks her hymen and there's a release of blood. That creates a bond, or what we call a covenant bond, what we term as cutting a covenant. Covenants are cut. So a covenant always involves the shedding of blood. So therefore, this is a powerful process. The unfortunate part is it's happening to images. Now that's what is really scary. So what happens is the wiring for sex is now to images, not a human being. There's no blood, there's no flesh, there's no warmth, there's no breathing, there's no moaning and whatever. None of that. It's all images on a phone or on a TV or whatever. Now, brothers and sisters, let me tell you now what that does. Because the imprint is to images and not a human being, this is the wiring that becomes the trigger to sexuality. It is no longer wiring to a human being. And here's the part that's scary. Because it's not a human being, there's a way God designed us such that when you get that bonding through a human being with the blood and the breathing and the warmth and the whole participation of the body in the process of this union of sex in marriage, because it's not a human being, there is an inadequacy, because the images that you're looking at don't carry this entire experience. So there's a short circuiting there of the experience. So what that does, my friends, is instead you are inadequately connected to sexuality. So this, whatever you look at, that was your stimulus at first, it doesn't work anymore. So And we know this because in psychology, it's tolerance. Your body develops mental tolerance for the stimulant. That's why people who do drugs have to keep looking for stronger doses, because they're just no longer getting that high with the little that they had. That's why people who drink also, they find that their bodies become tolerant, so they're not appreciating, they're not getting high anymore with that drink. So they start to look for stronger stuff to achieve what they're looking for, which is the high. If you are in pornography, you start looking for stronger and more powerful stuff that is going to make you receive that high, because whatever it is that you're experiencing is just not getting you to that first high, that first experience where you orgasmed to whatever you were watching. So a lot of people start going deeper and deeper, looking for images that are going to stimulate them. And what happens to many of these people is they spend longer and longer periods of time looking for that image to just get them going. And that's exactly what this stuff does. So here's what happens. Now, when you get married, problem, because you have become bound to images. So when you have a flesh and blood human being, they're just not going to give you the high that you had with your masturbation on pornography. So that's the real dangers, my brothers and sisters. That's what makes it bad. And this is very, very serious for younger people. It's not the same, and I'm dead serious. It's not the same as if a 40, and I'm not excusing 40-year-olds, but I'm saying anybody who's 35, 40, 45, and they find themselves in pornography, they're just not going to have the same problem that the 15-year-old gets. They're not the same. Why? Because they bonded to flesh and blood in the beginning. Yes, Deacon Chanda, I agree with you. There's some spirituality there, but I'm not dealing with the spiritual. I want to just deal with it purely from a psychological standpoint. So the older persons are not going to be bound to pornography the way the younger people are, because they had flesh and blood human being experience. So many of them will, if they do find themselves doing that, they will do it because it's a reaction to probably lack of sex or some problem in the marriage, and so they resort to the pornography, maybe distance or whatever, but they resort to the porn, but it just isn't the same for them. In fact, a lot of them end up going into extramarital affairs, and some of them even go into prostitutes, because it's just not the same. They're not getting the kick. Why? Because their kick came from flesh and blood. You get it? But for the younger people, that's dangerous. For the younger people, their first experience was images. So a number of them will now literally resort to, for women especially, they'll get into sex toys, they'll use all manner of things, because now they get into very, very serious masturbation. Why? Because they got bound to images. The images aren't doing the job. They need a more intense experience, and so they get into the toys, which make them get into even more intense experiences. Then they start looking for all manner of toys. And what that does is, for them also, real sex will not work. Because remember, they indulge when their prefrontal cortex wasn't fully developed, when they should have bonded with a real human. They bonded with toys, they bonded with pornography. So that's the real problem, my brothers and sisters, that affects young people when they get into porn. So let nobody cheat you and think it's harmless. It's very harmful. And for young people, it can do a serious problem. In fact, here's the real danger now for young people who get into porn. Men. They end up suffering from erectile dysfunction. That's right. Okay? So they suffer from erectile dysfunction. Why do they suffer from erectile dysfunction? Because they expend too much energy, or they're too, vigorous, or whatever it is. They're doing something quite intense with their porn experiences and masturbation, that when they come to a real flesh and blood human being, they're not even turned on anymore, because that human being should be doing something that they see on these porn sites. And this is where fetishes come in. This is where a fetish, by the way, is a kinky behavior, when you are turned on by unusual things. And some of them want to enact fantasies that they see in their porn acts in real life, and that can become quite a problem, especially if there is a bit of a communication situation going on between the couple. It's different if both couples are kind of kinky and into some crazy stuff, that's different. But many times you find that that may not be so easy, especially in our African setup, because we are very conservative. So when you start doing things that are a bit unusual, people will start getting a bit worked up about it. So you find that because somebody watches so much porn, they want to indulge in oral sex, or they want to do something a bit more, kinky, tie each other up, and I don't know, use pain or whatever. But then again, you realize, where is that coming from? It's coming from what they've watched, what they have indulged with in their, experiences on the internet. And it's very deadly. And that's where you see even the thing of filming each other, or filming or doing sex, sex videos across the internet, and then people end up in trouble, because obviously these things end up, in the public eye, which is absolutely not desired. So this is all coming from the indulgence of pornography. So what is the solution? How do we break free? I'll be very honest with you, it's not as easy as a video here. It's way, way more complex than a video. So even if I do a video for you guys, it's not going to be the same. But let me explain briefly on how you work around this. But it's like I keep saying, it's not easy. It's something that needs some far more work than what I'm saying. Okay? So let me begin by mentioning that there's a need to delve deeper into how best to deal with that. And the number one thing is to rewire the mind, because many of them find that they have been bound by the wrong wiring. They bound themselves to these images. So you have to unbind them from that. And the unbinding is a process. Why? Because they will need to go through a process of breaking free of that particular old habit and then connecting afresh to a new, better habit. So that process is not as easy as it sounds. And to be honest, I am not able to get into the technique here, because it would make this video too long. But the very short of it is exactly what I've said. That they need to get into a place where they rewire themselves. How do you do that? You first deal with the frame that caused the injury, which is the porn. And there's a way to deal with that. And then once you deal with that, then you now reconnect in a totally different way. Now, some people have sent messages here. Let me start with Maxwell X, who is always on my case, very controversial gentleman, or whether it is lady, I don't know. He says, is it a sin or not to masturbate? The sin is to look lustfully at images. See that let's get that part right. So it's when you look at images lustfully, or when you think of someone lustfully, you have sinned. So that's where the sin is. The sin is in the looking at images lustfully, and looking at a woman lustfully or a man lustfully, and then going through the process. That then means you have sinned. So that's where the sin is. Now, Marvel here says, open hypocrisy is one of the reasons for insincerity in Christianity. Let young people explore their bodies in moderation than know nothing about it and expect a miracle to happen in the confines of marriage. Nowadays, marriage is true tragedy. I disagree, Marvel. The secret is to talk about it and teach them right, not to let them explore. Explore with what? A camera? Explore with images and pornography? Heck no. Do you know the death that comes from that industry? Do you know the hell that actors and actresses go through in that industry? Those are literal merchants of their bodies. They're merchandising their bodies and souls. And it's a dark industry with so many suicides, so many depression, and the levels are so high. I've had the privilege of watching a number of videos from ex-porn stars, and the stories are horrific. So to say that it's okay is really evil. It's like saying, cocaine is okay as long as people take it themselves and it's their own choice, when we know that that can lead to addiction, death, and destruction of a life. The porn industry is the ultimate industry of use of people. Objectification of people. And so if you're going to say somebody can explore, but using the porn industry, you're feeding off the death of people. You're feeding off the destruction of people's lives. It's kind of like the betting industry. So I have nothing nice to say about that. What young people need is open conversation. I've had open conversations with my sons and their group. And I'm very, very candid. I don't run around corners. I don't hide. Now, in our culture in the past, these are conversations that were done by our uncles and aunties because we had strong-knit societies where these things could be spoken. But then the dynamics of modern day living means that the fabric of families has been broken. We no longer have those communities where you could connect with your uncle and auntie and deal with these taboo subjects. That's just not there anymore. Further, we have the invasion of this thing, this very thing I'm speaking to right now. It has broken into spaces and is bringing really terrible stuff into the eyes of individuals. So what we need to do is openly speak. So I'm one of those, and I get into trouble for this, but I'm one of those guys that believes in open conversations with young people, unless you tell those young people everything they need to know. It's better it comes from you as either a parent, uncle, or whatever than for it to come from the internet. Because if you don't do it, the internet will do it. And you know very well the internet is going to do it wrong. And these movies nowadays with the whole agenda of destroying the children through all these strange cultural beliefs, especially LGBT, that's not helping at all. So you as a parent need to now parent up, if I can use that word, whether you're a mom or a dad, single mom, single dad, together, somebody has to deal with it. If it's a young lady, a woman has to speak to her. If it's a young man, a man has to speak to her. And they need to be told about these things. Forewarned is forearmed. You see, by talking about this to them in gory detail, without hiding anything back, you are saving their souls. You are letting them know, hey guys, I know this is the thing. I know your bodies are going all over the place, but this is the reality. I wish, when I think back to my own childhood, I realized I did not have a strong male figure that was moral and who could be a voice to me. So it drove me in crazy directions. I did a lot of things I'm not proud of, but that's because there wasn't a voice. I mean, my mom did what she could, but there wasn't a voice to talk to me. So there are things that I indulged and did which I think I would have never done if I had a very strong male voice, a father figure, some kind of uncle who could be a moral compass to guide me. Because young people, the beauty about that whole undeveloped mental state, they are prone and open to education and guidance. That's why they learn throughout those ages. Their formative years, their teen years, they learn. Why? Because whatever they learn and is laid down as a foundation at that age becomes what carries them through in their adulthood. If you see any child with major issues, upbringing plays a very big role. How were they brought up? Who was their voice? Who spoke to them? Did they speak to them, or did they lead them down a path of destruction? So that is a big deal, and I make a very big deal of it because I realize that that's the key. So to say open hypocrisy, Marble, I disagree completely. And I think your statement is very closed because you make it sound like we don't know what we're talking about. You make it sound like experimenting is the way to raise children. That's why you have crazy children from some of these famous actors. You see how their children behave? That's because they believe that let them explore. No. Show them the way to go. The Bible says train up a child in the way it should go, and when it grows up, it shall not depart from it. You can't let a child just be free because no, they are exploring. No, they are not exploring. Their mental faculties are not ready for exploration. It is your job as the adult to guide them. And believe me, when you guide them well and they grow up, they will be able to follow that way. So thank you so much for this particular session. I just had to raise this because I was very touched by the message that young lady sent to me, who is a wife who sees herself in a situation and she really needs the guidance. Remember, young people, if you're watching this video, by the way, parents, if you're watching this, share. Okay, and let it help somebody. I think I just missed one question. I just realized there was a very good question here about yes, what are the men who take too long than normal to ejaculate? The question is, what is long than normal? I can tell you that people who have been circumcised will tend to take longer because they have less sensitivity. That's really the reason. But premature ejaculation is also a problem, and those are things that can be dealt with mentally through the right therapy. Premature ejaculation is when people, you orgasm too quickly before, the wife can do anything, and then the other one is when it takes too long. But the one for taking too long, for me, isn't an issue. It's a case of sitting down and just having a good conversation about it and finding a way to deal with that situation. So on that note, guys, thank you so much. Share this video. Let others know, especially young people, on the dangers I just highlighted. God bless.